All right, so today we're diving into one of Karl Marx's earliest and honestly most controversial essays. It was written way back in 1843, and it's called On the Jewish Question. And what's fascinating about it is how it starts as a response to this very specific political debate happening in Germany at the time, but then it just explodes into this huge radical critique of what modern freedom even is.
And really, the whole thing boils down to this one core question. And it's a big one that philosophers have wrestled with forever. Can a state really be considered free if the people who live in it aren't free in their day-to-day lives? I mean, really think about that. That's the puzzle Marx is trying to piece together here.
Okay, so to really get what Marx is saying, we've got to jump in our time machine and go back to 19th century Germany. At the time, there was this huge, heated debate going on about whether to grant full civil and political rights to Jewish people. It was a massive intellectual flashpoint. So it all kicked off with what seems like a pretty simple demand, right? Jewish communities in Germany were basically saying, hey, we want to be recognized as full citizens with all the rights that come with it. But, it was never just a legal thing. It blew up into this much bigger conversation about religion, the state, and what freedom itself actually means. So into this whole mess steps this prominent philosopher, a guy named Bruno Bauer. And he comes in with a really radical idea for how to solve this whole equality problem. It's Bauer's argument that Marx is going to directly take on.
Now, Bauer's main argument was, well, it was pretty out there for the time. He said, look, the problem isn't that one religion has privileges over another. The problem is religion itself. He believed that to get to real freedom, the state had to stop being Christian and individuals, including Jewish people, had to stop being religious altogether. For him, the only way everyone could be truly equal was in a state that was completely, totally free of religion.
So Bauer's logic here is this kind of radical, all-or-nothing universalism. He's basically looking at the Christian state and saying, you've got to give up your religion, and then he turns to the Jewish person and says, and you've got to give up yours. In his mind, freedom from religion was the absolute first step you had to take to get political freedom for everyone. You had to shed that specific religious identity to become this generic, universal citizen.
And this is the exact moment Karl Marx steps into the ring. He reads what Bauer wrote and basically says, hold on a second. You're onto something, but you've completely missed the real root of the problem. This question you see here, it's the pivot point for his entire argument.
You see, Marx's whole takedown of Bauer rests on one single, really powerful idea. He says Bauer is confusing two totally different kinds of freedom. And understanding this difference, well, it's the key to unlocking this entire essay.
So, on the one hand, you've got what he calls political emancipation. Think of this as the freedom of a citizen within a state. But then, on the other hand, Marx throws in this much deeper, much more radical concept, human emancipation. And that's about the freedom of the individual in their actual, real, everyday life. And his big point is that just because you get the first one, it doesn't mean you automatically get the second. Not at all.
So let's break that down. What does Marx even mean by political emancipation? Well, it's basically when the state decides to be neutral. It gets rid of rules that say only property owners can vote. It declares that your religion is your own private business. Essentially, it treats everyone as an equal citizen under the law. And Marx is like, yeah, this is a huge step forward. But, and this is a big but, it's not the end of the story. It's not true freedom. Human emancipation, on the other hand, is a whole different ballgame. This is about getting past the deep-seated selfishness and isolation that, for Marx, defines modern life. We're not just talking about changing some laws here. We're talking about fundamentally changing how we relate to each other, about healing this kind of split inside ourselves so we can become genuinely social, communal beings.
And to prove that this political freedom isn't the be-all and end-all, Marx uses a case study. He looks at the one country he thought was the most politically advanced at the time, the United States. He says, just look at the United States, right? The state is perfectly secular, there's a clear separation of church and state, your political rights have nothing to do with your faith, and yet America is an incredibly religious country. So here's the kicker. The state might be free from religion, but the people clearly are not. And that means the real problem has to be hiding somewhere deeper than just politics and law.
And this realization leads Marx to his big diagnosis. He argues there's this fundamental split, this deep division in the identity of every single person living in a modern state. And it's a split created by the political state itself.
Basically, he says, we're all living a kind of double life. We have one self that exists in the political community, and then a totally different self that exists in what he calls civil society. In civil society, that's the messy, real world of jobs, business, and all our private, selfish interests.
And he actually uses a couple of French terms to make this point crystal clear. On one side, you are the citoyen, the citizen. This is your abstract self, the part of you that participates in the community and the state. But on the other side, you're the bourgeois, the private individual, the one who's out there in the marketplace just looking out for number one.
This table really lays it all out. Our life as a citizen, the citoyen, is kind of like our heavenly life. It's abstract. It's where we pretend we're all part of some great collective good. But our real earthly life is as the bourgeois in civil society, where we're just isolated individuals chasing our own self-interest. For Marx, that noble political life is basically a fantasy. It's just a mask hiding the real dog-eat-dog world of the economy.
Okay, so now that he's laid out this idea of the split self, Marx completely reframes the original debate about the Jewish question. He says, you guys are arguing about the wrong thing. This has nothing to do with religion or theology. It has everything to do with economics.
He argues that the real roadblock to that deeper human emancipation isn't religion. Nope. It's the very foundation of our daily lives in civil society, what he calls practical need and self-interest. That, he says, is the real core of modern life. It's the real religion we all follow, no matter what God we claim to worship on Sunday.
And this is where we get to the most controversial and, frankly, deeply problematic part of the essay. Marx, using some pretty ugly anti-Semitic stereotypes from his time, asks this question. He says, what is the worldly religion of the Jew? And he answers, huckstering. What is his worldly god? He answers, money. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand what he's trying to do here, however clumsily. He's not making a point about the Jewish faith itself. He's trying to use Judaism as a metaphor for the entire economic system he's critiquing.
So the big move he makes, and again, it's based on this really flawed and offensive metaphor, is to take that stereotype and apply it to everyone. For Marx, todayism in this text becomes his shorthand for the spirit of commerce, for capitalism itself. His point is that everyone in modern society, whether they're Christian or not, has basically adopted this mindset. We've all made money our real god. So for him, the emancipation of mankind means freeing all of us from this obsession with commerce and self-interest.
So, after all that radical reframing, where does that leave us? Well, Marx's final conclusion blasts way past the original debate and offers up this new, ultimate vision of what liberty could be. So let's just quickly recap his whole line of thought. He takes this very specific debate about religious rights, and he turns it into this sweeping, universal critique of the limits of political freedom. He argues that true human emancipation is only possible when we finally overcome that split inside of us, when the real, private individual becomes one with the abstract public citizen. It's about taking back the social power we've given away to a distant state. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? I mean, Marx wrote this stuff nearly 200 years ago, but his diagnosis of this split self, this gap between who we are as citizens and who we are in our private, self-interested lives, it feels incredibly relevant today. So where do you see that split, that contradiction, playing out in the world around you?